If you're ready for honest conversations on a variety of health topics and a return to the fundamentals of natural holistic healing, welcome. Grab your filtered water, get comfortable, and let's drop some truth. Just trust the science. Whose science are they telling us to trust? What if there's proof that the information provided to the public as evidence is actually based in fraud? Today, we are going to peel back the curtains on some aspects of scientific research and reveal to you the level of corruption and deception that's been at play for a long time and is still ongoing today. I'm Dr. Aviva Wertkin. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Robin Tozan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Welcome back to another episode of Truth Bombs and Tinctures. Now, many of us have unfortunately witnessed the hijacking of medical journals and really the entire field of medical research. This was once a source of very trustworthy, cutting-edge information that unfortunately became an avenue to provide results that support a very different agenda that has nothing to do really with the health and safety of American people. Whether it's the food, drug, energy, or chemical companies, we are literally being lied to under the pretense of science. We have put together several examples to illustrate this for you. There is actually so much evidence on this that we realized we need to break this up into several different episodes, but we are so excited to jump in and start sharing this information with you. So, Dr. Tozan, why don't you start getting into it?
So, yeah, guys, we tend to trust that our government and the FDA and the CDC, they all have our best interest at heart. We all want to believe that. We all want to believe the studies we hear about on the news, we read about on an article on the internet is true. And unfortunately, that's just not the case these days, right? Power and profit and politics have gotten involved in our science and in all of these agencies, unfortunately. And the question has shifted with science from what is actually true to what gets approved nowadays. And so understanding that, and what I have here for you, we're not just pulling things out of the air. We're going to back up everything we're saying with evidence, and we're probably going to be dropping some truth bombs that's going to blow your mind. If you haven't really dove into this topic, you're going to hear a lot of things that may even sound unbelievable, but we're not just going to say our opinion. We're going to back up everything we're saying. And so this is a study that you can pull up that talks about how corrupt the science is. So they even talk about it in the scientific literature, all this corruption. And we're going to show you a few more examples. I just want to make sure you understand, listen with an open mind, because we are probably going to mention things that's going to be shocking to you, but that's all I ask is listen with an open mind and see the proof for yourself and then make a decision about that.
Yes, we're not sharing this information because we enjoy sharing this kind of information so much as this is so important and we really want people to understand the truth of what's happening. I should also mention that I have a background in research at the NIH. I worked at the National Institute of Mental Health and the Clinical Neuroendocrinology branch. And I also worked at the then called National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine when their intramural branch opened up. That does not mean we are going to inundate you with nerdy details of research. What it means, though, is we want to give you some information so that you can learn how to start evaluating research on your own and start understanding key little details to look for, because we tend to just have an emotional reaction to a catchy title that we see in the news without really knowing how to evaluate the information behind it. So, the gold standard in research is really the benchmark of criteria for having the most accurate and reliable methods to evaluate testing and treatment. We're going to go through just a few of these quickly, and then we're going to give you examples to illustrate where this is actually not happening. So, reproducible research is key. Can the research be replicated by independent research institutions? Is there transparency of the methods and of the data? Is the research being evaluated by a group of peers without bias? There's something called peer review that happens for medical journals. Many people are not aware of the biases that are involved in these actual peer review processes. Is the research being done without conflict of interest? This is a really big one to pay attention to. And then finally, there is the gold standard of a research study design, which is called a double-blind, placebo-controlled research study. This is really important to keep in mind. We're going to come back to this a little bit later in the show so that you all understand what exactly it means to utilize a double-blind, placebo-controlled study.
So, the first topic we're going to dive into here is who is funding the study? This is one of the most important aspects of the study, and usually one of the first questions I ask when evaluating any study. And this is will give you the clue, is this a good study or not? So, this is where a lot of corruption happens. You get these studies and they're being paid for by certain people who have interest in getting certain results. So, whenever you see any study that has especially surprising results, the first question you want to see is who is actually paying for this? And I remember years ago, there was a study about coconut oil that came out and it said coconut oil basically is terrible for you and it causes your cholesterol to go high. And of course, because all of a sudden, all these people were starting to switch to coconut oil. And looking at this, people were like, oh my God, coconut oil is terrible for you. But when you started diving deeper, and especially into who funded the study, which wasn't so much apparent, but you had to research some of those people, but they were actually being funded by people who made canola oil. So is that research really accurate? Or are they just paying to get paying for a paper to say that?
I think we could just say they went ahead and paid for those outcomes because we now have so much evidence to show the downside of canola oil and the upside of coconut oil.
Exactly. So you see a lot of companies paying scientists to do this. And so this is the biggest issue you need to look at first, because this will often tell you right away if the research is good or not.
We have a lot of examples to illustrate the role of who's funding the research and how it impacts the quality of the research. Here's one big example. Many of us are familiar with the concept that eating foods high in fat and cholesterol put you at risk for having heart disease. What most people don't realize is that the research showing that was predominantly funded by the Sugar Research Foundation. So, the Sugar Research Foundation actually was aware of the role of sugar and its impact on heart disease, but they intentionally did not disclose that and intentionally funded research papers to say that coronary heart disease was caused by fat and cholesterol. And what that did to the American people is it motivated people to eat lower fat or fat free foods, particularly highly processed, high in sugar foods. And we witnessed a steady increase in rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. The very thing that we're taught from the scientific evidence is actually the opposite. And we saw over an 80% increase in deaths from chronic heart disease since this came out. Why do you think that the Sugar Research Foundation decided to do this? And by the way, consider the coincidence that cholesterol lowering medications are also a multi-billion-dollar profit per year industry. Sure, it's just a coincidence. But you know what? You don't have to take my word for it. There's actually a medical doctor named Dr. John Abramson who published a book called Overdosed America: The Broken Promise of American Medicine. And he was a family doctor in Boston, Massachusetts. He was practicing for almost 20 years when he began to see and experience that he was being pressured to prescribe drugs in a very different way than he had been, and being pressured to practice medicine very differently, to such an extent that he began investigating the research and trying to understand what was going on. And that led him to uncover the extent of corruption that's occurring in the field of research. And so he put together this book, and he goes over several top medications that the public has been told is very safe and effective when the data actually doesn't support that at all.
We just put together a little list, because this is commonplace, of all these companies getting caught red-handed doing similar tactics, right? So tobacco industry, I'm sure we don't have to go in much into that. They suppressed lots of scientific evidence for decades linking smoking to cancer, right? We know that story really well. Merck, a pharmaceutical company, they hid a lot of data when it came to their drug Vioxx. And they hid the data showing that Vioxx actually increased risk of heart attacks. Okay, they've also been accused of designing studies in a way that would produce favorable outcomes. So this is the morality and the ethics of these pharmaceutical companies.
In their own initial studies, Merck found that Vioxx increased the risk of heart attacks and strokes. They hid that data so that it would still get approval. And then the research scientists at the FDA did their own study, which found that there was a 4-fold increase in heart attacks and strokes. But would you be surprised to learn that they went ahead and buried that research too and continued to keep Vioxx on the market? It was only after an additional 3-year study that confirmed that taking Vioxx doubled the risk of heart attacks and strokes, where they ended up voluntarily doing a recall on the drug. That's 5 years after the drug came out, and
After they knew.
thousands, if not millions, of people were taking this medication. Right? So
It's a shame.
we want to believe that the FDA is an organization that's also there to help protect us. And then the further down this rabbit hole that you go, you realize how often these other regulatory agencies are generally getting paid off to continue suppressing that information and promoting whatever agenda they're getting paid to promote.
Absolutely, which is sad. And we are going to get into that topic a little more later. So also Klein Smith, right? They buried data also that showed that their drug Avandia, it also increased heart attacks. So this is a pretty common one. Pfizer, we all know Pfizer. Pfizer paid hundreds of millions of dollars to settle lawsuits, alleging that they manipulated data when it came to the Neurontin drug.
Celebrex, one of the things they did is they only reported on 6 months of data, even though they did a 12-month study. They went ahead and withheld literally 6 months worth of data, which is quite suspicious. And years later, a former employee of Pfizer admitted that they participated in fabricating over 21 scientific articles. And
Crazy.
yeah, it's really
And this is who people trust. Oh, Pfizer, I trust, this
they
is the
care
sad
about
part.
us.
And nobody's going after these companies. There's so much money involved and lobbyists. Oh, it's really frustrating. It's
Oh, and
really
one of the
frustrating when you
things
see this corruption.
I think this was with both Vioxx and Celebrex. They market it as a safer alternative to NSAIDs, which is your like aspirin, ibuprofen.
Mhm.
Those are known to cause a lot of damage to the stomach and the liver. So they were saying, ooh, these new pain relievers, they don't have the same GI effects. So these are superior. But when that was later researched, they couldn't find anything to back up that claim.
Mm.
And I also remember when they pulled Vioxx from the market, people were actually upset because they had found pain relieving benefit from taking it and they didn't want the drug taken away. And so, for those people, they're thinking, I'd rather take this drug that might kill me from a heart attack or a stroke because I don't want to live in pain, because they don't know that there's any other options for treating their arthritis
Right.
or rheumatoid arthritis or chronic pain. And I would like to point out that the same people that push these medications or promote these medications are the same people that tell you that natural medicine is dangerous and ineffective. So that's basically pushing people into that place where they have to choose, well, give me the drug that might kill me because they don't know that there's any other way to actually address what's causing the pain.
We both work with people who are in pain all the time. I had a patient, she couldn't walk to her mailbox. After I finished working with her, she was walking up to 2 miles a day and biking. And people don't understand there's so many more things you can do to work with your pain. And I know we're getting off topic here, so we'll get back.
Mm. We can easily
We'll
go
get
off on tangents.
yes. So Coca-Cola too. Coca-Cola, we all know this is very well known, but they were offering bribes to say, "Oh, soft drinks don't harm children's teeth," and to downplay the role of sugar in obesity. Right? This is the morality we're dealing with here. And these people get caught all the time. These are the ones that just got caught. How many other companies do you think are pulling these kind of tactics that aren't getting caught or not getting talked about? Right? Because the only time it really comes out is when enough of the public finds out about it. They start being noisy. Right? And then we're going to get
Yes.
into Monsanto a little bit here. Monsanto is a terrible company. Terrible. Their tactics are really down low. Okay. And so, any scientists that try to publish any content against them, they start going after them in their reputation. And they created all these fake online personas to start harassing scientists. Okay. This is sick. The other part of Monsanto that really disturbs me is what they've done to farmers. They have gone after farmers. They started making their seeds and patenting these things and forcing farmers they're not allowed to save seeds. And these farmers have to pay more money to rebuy seeds every year, even though they have seeds. But this started a really big uh, ring of corruption here with Monsanto. And they've been doing this, they've been going after farmers for decades. They go after farmers when GMO stuff flies into the pollen and the seeds fly into other farmers' fields that aren't using GMO. They go after those guys too and say, hey, you're planting our seeds. And they're not. It's getting cross-contaminated from the wind, but they're winning in court because Monsanto has billions. They have gotten from farmers a total of $15 million. They have forced farmers to pay them. It's sick. When you really dive into this topic, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here, it's really sick what they've done to these poor farmers.
Basically have been bankrupting and enslaving these farmers.
And they pressure them to settle out of court because these farmers don't have money. And Monsanto can keep them in court nonstop because they have millions. And they bleed these farmers dry. And that's their other tactic.
These really critical points of what this company's products has done to farmers, which has essentially made them incredibly sick, bankrupt, and enslaved them. So Monsanto being the maker of glyphosates, which you may have heard us talk about briefly on some other episodes that we've had. And glyphosates within Monsanto's own early research in the 1970s, they learned that glyphosates cause severe organ damage and tumors in mice and rats, and that research was completely suppressed. And then later, the EPA was researching glyphosates. They also found that they caused a massive amount of tumors in mice and rats. And oh, to our surprise, that was also covered up and it was still
Hmm.
approved for use. And then later, as Dr. Tozan was alluding to, there was another research center. I think it was actually the World Health Organization's cancer research something. They ended up coming out and saying that glyphosates are a probable known carcinogen, meaning it's likely to cause cancer in humans. And that really pissed off Monsanto. So they came out attacking them, attacking all the information, saying that they were lying and all these things. And then they came out with a study in 2000 as like the landmark study saying the science is settled. Glyphosates are perfectly safe for humans. They don't cause any health problems. And so, dun dun dun, dun, glyphosates are totally fine, except that they're not. And they continue to cause a lot of health issues, including cancer in many, many people, predominantly farmers being the ones that have the highest exposure. And as mentioned previously, Monsanto has then, and then now Bayer, has been sued for millions of dollars for this damage. And we are now at the point where our own government has passed a law to keep protecting the use of glyphosates under the guise of national security. So, in summary, we have this chemical that's being used on all this food and land that is known to be highly toxic and poisonous, to damage organs and cause various types of cancer. This is well known throughout the industry, and yet the American people are still being exposed to this on a daily basis,
And it ruins your liver, but we
among
won't
other
get into
things.
that. Uh, yeah, so we might get a little heated today because this is a really big topic that really upsets both of us and gets us very frustrated because we're sitting here trying to make change and it's hard. It's hard when these things are working against you. You can feel better though. You can do things to combat this and feel better. It just takes a little bit more self-care. So, um talking about conflicts of interest, and these are everywhere. These are everywhere. We have doctors getting paid to give certain drugs. We have lots of research that is being paid for by drug companies, ghostwriting research. You have subsidies given to these doctors. There's so much conflict of interest. I'm not going to go through all this, but this is just a list from Marsh, and she's the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. She was the editor for decades. I think she got out in the year 2000. But this is happening everywhere. And I just kind of wanted to flash this to show you guys we need to be on the lookout because we can't just blindly trust anymore, right? And so speaking of conflict of interest, we're going to talk about FDA. FDA approved. We all think FDA approved, oh, it means it's good for me. Yeah. Well, let's dive into that big topic. Okay. So the FDA, who's running the FDA? Well, would you be surprised to find out Big Pharma runs the FDA? So what happens is you have the FDA board and all the advisors on the FDA, the people who are approving drugs. And these people come from the pharmaceutical industry. So you have a company paying someone, they're getting paid, then they go to the FDA, they start getting paid by the FDA. They're approving drugs from the company they just came from and were getting money from. And then a lot of times when they finish their work with the FDA after, 5-10 years, they go right back to the same company. You think that's a conflict of interest there? Because it's kind of, that's a no-brainer to me, but nobody talks about this. We don't talk about how big pharma people are approving the drugs on the FDA board. And this is a really big problem. So there's a couple examples I'll throw up here. The former FDA commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, he went right back to Pfizer. And so did Patricia Cavazzoni, who was the former Center for Drug Evaluation and Research director. So this is the revolving door we're dealing with. And I believe it was 9 out of 10 of the last FDA commissioners went right back to the drug company. So this is so unfortunate, guys. And this is what people don't realize, but this is what's happening here. It's so convoluted. Now, I also want to bring up some facts about the FDA that people may not realize. But when there's a new drug up for approval, the FDA does absolutely no research on it. The FDA relies on research from that company, and they evaluate that research from that company, and then they make an approval. Well, there's a problem here because a lot of that research is fraudulent and it's corrupt, as we talked about, like with Vioxx. So the FDA is supposed to be keeping us safe. How are you keeping us safe if you're not even doing research on these drugs? Right? And so this is what's happening. And this brings me to FDA recalls. So what happens is, so the FDA approves stuff and they put it out, they end up recalling it. So this is taken from FDA.gov. There's real statistics here, but it's showing you how many recalls the FDA has done. This is from 2012 to 2026, these statistics. And so this data is over a 14-year span. Okay, and they've broken it down in the pie chart with drugs and medical devices and biologics. Your biologics are going to be like your gene therapies and hormones and monoclonal antibodies, things like that, and food, right? So the thing to understand here, and I think just the big picture here, is they're recalling about 2,500 products a year. 2,500 products that they have approved and put out there and said was safe. That is a lot. So over 14 years, 2,500 products a year, that's what? That's 25,000 products that they've said were safe and had to recall. Do you feel safe? Because I don't feel safe. It feels like they're just putting stuff out and saying this is great for you, and then oopsies, turns out we're hurting you. Sorry. Okay, so this is super important to understand. The FDA is not being helpful here. I don't think they're being helpful. And so just because something is FDA approved does not mean that it's safe for you. So do understand that, because I think these numbers are quite alarming.
Yes. And I just want to add to that because we all want to believe and trust these government agencies. This agency was put in place as a safety standard to regulate these things. And so we think absolutely we can trust them. If it's FDA approved, that means it's safe. And what we have uncovered here and are sharing with you today is that that is no longer the case. Maybe at its inception, the FDA was doing the job that they were put there to do, but that is no longer the case. This is also to say, it doesn't mean that everybody who works at the FDA is part of the corruption. It is typically the people at the top of the organizations that are the ones creating this. And then certainly you see how much it can trickle down. But unfortunately, yes, the takeaway is just because something has the stamp of approval from the FDA doesn't mean they've actually done the rigorous research and confirmed that things are safe and effective before they put it out there for our use. And in fact, most Americans end up using these products and navigating years of terrible side effects before the medications or these other devices get pulled. They do a lot of oopsies and there's no accountability at all.
Exactly. We need to use our discernment, guys. Easier if you have a practitioner who can help you, who's done the work for sure. But yeah, we need to have a better way of figuring out if a product is good or not. Best thing to do is return to nature and use more natural stuff. Okay, but I'm biased. So in here I have a couple of quotes, and these are from editors of prominent scientific journals. So the first one says, it is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. And that's Dr. Marcia Angel, who I mentioned earlier. This is a quote from her in one of her interviews. And then I have another quote from Richard Horton, who was editor of The Lancet, another major scientific publication. And he wrote that the case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards the darkness. If your own editors of your scientific journals are making statements like this is very scary. And I will tell you, Richard Horton actually published a article, and unfortunately I could not find it. I used to send it out to a lot of people years ago, and I changed computers. I have not been able to find it. But in that article, he stated that something like over 33% or 35% of the literature cannot be replicated. The scientific literature cannot be replicated. And that was one of, if you remember, we mentioned that earlier, as being part of our gold standard of science. You should be able to take a study, write exactly what you did, give it to someone else, and they can read what you did and do the exact same thing and get the exact same results. That's good science. And that is not what we have here, right? He said 30-something%. If you actually look this up and look in different areas, you're going to get much different numbers. So this was an article about the cancer studies. And I believe this one, they mentioned 70% of the cancer studies cannot be replicated. How can we trust in this? This is not good science. And how is this bad science being peer reviewed and put out there to the public? That's the whole point of peer review, right? Corruption, guys. Corruption. And so I'm not saying don't trust anything. I'm saying use your discernment here, because this is not good for any of us. The trust is broken, and it's hugely broken. And that does take me to the peer review issue. Here's an article about the biases in the peer review process. And I'm not going to dive into a lot of this. If you want to look this up, you can really read more about this. It should be an amazing process that helps keep the corruption out. But unfortunately, it has been touched by the corruption as well. And so this is something we can't trust in either, unfortunately. The next part we need to talk about when we're evaluating a scientific publication is the methods that they're using, right? And so this is another way where the corruption comes in. And as we mentioned earlier, we kind of touched on this with certain companies manipulating data so that they can show the results they want to show. And so this is, who funds it is usually the first question I ask when I'm evaluating a study. Who's funding it? Second one is what methods did they use? You get these scientific publications that make this blanket statement, oh, meat's bad for you. Okay, well, what kind of meat did they use in the study? Did they use grass-fed meat, clean meat, or did they use meat that's full of antibiotics and full of pesticides and all these nasty stuff? You have to look at those things. Or sometimes we'll look at a supplement. What supplement did they use? Did they use a synthetic supplement? Did they use a real good quality supplement? Because that's how we know, is this actually good science or not? And so this is how they really hide a lot of the corruption through the methods, because they know most lay people don't understand how to do this. And most people are not going to take the time. They're going to read the headline and they're going to go with it, right? And even us, like, you have to pay for a lot of scientific articles. Some scientific articles, you can only get the abstract that doesn't go into all the details. And so sometimes you can't really evaluate unless you pay to see that whole article, and then you can get into the nitty-gritty details. You can hide so much stuff in the methods. So this is what we need to really dive into, is what methods were used.
Yes. So, to reiterate, one of the approaches that's used to manipulate the research is the ghostwriting that occurs by employees of these companies. And they basically just completely falsify the data and it gets published in the scientific journals, and people have no way of knowing essentially that this was all falsified. But then there's this other approach that Dr. Tozan was just talking about, which is designing studies in such a way to manipulate the outcomes. And so, one example to share with you all is a study that came out. And of course, the headlines were vitamin E supplementation, particularly at high doses, is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. And using this as an example because the Western medical model loves to reinforce the idea that natural medicine is either ineffective and or dangerous. So when you see this headline, it's a bit shocking. Oh my gosh, vitamin E increases the risk of prostate cancer? That's so scary. I should now avoid supplementing vitamin E. That would be a natural conclusion that you make. But if you go beyond the title and the summary and you start to dig into the details of the study design, which I understand many people are not interested in that. Um, in this case, when I dug into it, because I look at a title like that and I go, well, that doesn't actually make any sense. Why would vitamin E increase risk of prostate cancer? I want to know all the details now so I can understand. Maybe it does. Actually, it doesn't. And I'm going to explain why. There is a very different effect when you use a natural source of vitamin E versus a synthetic. And in this study, they did not use any natural vitamin E supplementation. They used a synthetic form of vitamin E, which is made from petrochemicals. So they were giving people a concentrated form of petrochemicals in a supplement form and then said, oh, it increases the risk of cancer. That we're going to say vitamin E is bad. And then when they added in selenium, they found it somehow neutralized the effect. And so they said, okay, selenium and vitamin E don't help anything, but if you take them together, it won't really have as much of a risk, which would then lead me to want to research more the benefits of selenium in helping the body detox petrochemicals. So here in the slide, if you're able to look at this, we just highlighted the sections to illustrate to you all how just changing the form of the supplement can give very biased results for the research. This is not a quality study, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. That's why you have to dive deeper. We can't just blindly trust the science. And that brings me to Depo-Provera. Depo-Provera has a really dark history. This is probably something I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And I know a lot of women get these injections, and I know most women who come in to see me who've gotten these injections absolutely regret it. But so let's go into their sordid history here. So Depo-Provera was created actually in the 1950s. And they kept trying to get it approved, and they kept getting denied. Why was it getting denied? Well, they were doing all these experiments on dogs and monkeys, and it was actually showing an increase in cancer in these animals. And so I don't know why they were trying to get approval when this was happening, but they were pushing to get approval. And the FDA at the point when they weren't as corrupt back, 50, 60 years ago, they were saying, no, this is causing cancer in animals. We can't use it. And so what happened was the FDA came in and they changed the rules. I believe this was in the 70s. They changed the rules to be because this was happening to too many companies, apparently. They changed the rules. Instead of using dogs and monkeys, they could now experiment on rats and mice. And so when Depo-Provera started experimenting on rats and mice, the rats and mice didn't get cancer. So now the FDA said, okay, we'll approve it. At some point, they did get approved for like a year or so, and it got revoked. And so they started using it on people and started experimenting on people, but they were targeting low income women and women in developing countries. And they were causing lots of problems. And so this is why I would never use this stuff. This is bad stuff. And I get it. People don't want to have children, but there are other ways to prevent yourself from getting pregnant rather than putting this bad stuff in your body that's very toxic and going to cause a lot of problems. So we just started scratching the surface with everything we wanted to share with you today. And I hope you got some new information that's starting to open your eyes as to the problem we are facing with the corruption of science. And I'm hoping you're seeing, hey, I can't just read something and believe it blindly. But we are going to have part 2 where we give you a lot more fun nuggets and drop a lot more truth bombs. So I hope you join us there. If you are looking for me online, you can find me at denvervitalistmedicine.com. And you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes. You can find me on my website, which is avivawertkin.com or naturemedical.com. So, yeah, as Dr. Tozan said, we just began to scratch the surface. Our part 2 is going to be full of even more scandals. So get ready for that if you are ready for this level of truth bombs. And remember to keep listening to your body. And if you're not sure how, keep listening to this show because we will eventually get to the point where we are hoping to help you learn how to do that.
Absolutely. So have a great one, and we'll see you on part 2. Thanks, guys.